In this episode, we're going to distinguish between what is implicit and explicit information. 2, we're going to use textual evidence to support the analysis of what is explicitly stated versus what is implicitly stated. So what is explicit now? The word explicit means clear and fully expressed. If something is explicit, there is no question as to what it means, no hidden meanings, and no room for misunderstanding. If a fact is explicit in a text, it is stated outright. For example, if the first sentence of the story is, "It was a dark and stormy night," that is an explicit fact. There's no room for debate. The reader cannot be confused and think that the story is set on a sunny morning. Implicit. If something is implicit, it is not stated clearly, but the reader understands it anyway through other clues in the text. For example, if a story begins with, "The trees were swaying wildly outside Anne's window as she prepared for bed, and the gutters were overflowing," the reader can infer that it is probably dark, stormy, and at night, even though the facts are not explicitly stated. So we could infer that it is probably dark because she is preparing for bed, that it is stormy because, the trees are swaying outside, and it's at night. So here we have some activities. Activity 1, fill in the blanks with the correct word, either explicit or implicit in the correct form. Dash information is often easier to argue about or debate since the exact meaning is open to interpretation. So this would be implicit information, information that is implied. Okay. Dash information, on the other hand, explains the meaning clearly so people can understand it easily. So once we say on the other hand, we know that this is going to be counter to the first one. So if that was implicit, that means this one should be explicit. Some teachers are vague about their class rules and expect students to have an dash understanding of acceptable behavior. So they are vague, but they expect the children to have an explicit understanding. So the teacher may not say something clearly. That's what vague means, but they expect that they will have an understanding of the behavior that is required. So they want them to do exactly something to qualify as acceptable behavior. All right, so this explicit here. Children learn language in an implicit manner because they are too young to learn grammar rules. I can't believe you cheated on your essay when I gave explicit instructions not to plagiarize. And plagiarize means to take somebody's work as your own, and that's totally unacceptable. Activity 2. Read the following scenarios and answer the questions. 1. Wendy was walking home from school when she found a sick bird lying on the ground under a tree. She stopped and gave the bird a look. She looked up and noticed a nest in the branches above her. She looked forward and continued walking home. What implicit information can you obtain from this story? Wendy loves birds. Wendy loves animals. Wendy is a selfish person. Wendy is running late for an appointment. Wendy needs to get home before dark. All right, so Wendy loves animals. She shows some concern about the animal, but it could be just curiosity. Wendy is a selfish person, not necessarily. We don't have enough information to determine that either way. She's running late for an appointment. Not sure about that. Wendy needs to get home before dark. Let's look at this. We know that she's walking home from school, so she's on her way home from school. And typically school ends at about 2:30 thereabout. She could have stopped at lessons or something. right? Or training for the track team or something. We don't know, but school is over. And generally after school is over, we head straight home. Okay. It goes on now and it says she looked forward and continued walking home. So here we have home here, walking home. Then after looking at this poor bird, she continues walking home. So we could safely conclude that Wendy needs to get home before dark. Number 2. The coach blew his whistle and told the team to pack it up. Practice was over. Little Michael asked his coach to please leave the lights in the gym on so he could stay a little longer. He stayed for another 2 hours practicing his shooting and dribbling. What information below is a good example of implicit information? Information that is implied, information that is not stated outright. Let's go. Michael is afraid of the dark. Michael is a dedicated athlete. Michael was scared to go home. Michael wanted to be a doctor. And the one that I would go with is B. Michael here was a dedicated athlete. Why? Practice is over, but he asks for permission to stay behind so that he could do what? Continue for 2 more hours practicing his shooting and dribbling. All right, so that shows dedication, going above and beyond the call of duty. Number 3. Mr. Canto looked at his alarm clock. It was 7:30 a.m. He should have left the house an hour ago. So he's late already. He was going to be late. He turned on the television and started thinking about what he wanted to make himself for breakfast. What can be implied about Mr. Canto? A. He will still make it to work on time? Absolutely not. B. He is nervous about getting to work after the bell rings? I don't see anything that implies that. He doesn't care about being late. He knows that his students can figure out things without him. So I want to use C as my answer because he gets up at 7:30. He should have left the house an hour ago. He's going to be late, but instead of rushing to get ready, he turns on the TV. If I was rushing to get to work, I wouldn't be turning on the TV. If you were rushing to get to school, you wouldn't be turning on the TV. And then he goes on to start thinking about what he's going to have for breakfast. If he was truly late, probably he would just skip breakfast altogether. So that is why C is the most appropriate answer. Let's look at activity 3 now. Whether the piece of information is explicit or implicit. Tough it up, man. It's just a little bruise. We're going to get you home now, Andre said, his voice alternating between terror and toughness. He and Leslie pulled Samson up from the ground. Can you walk, man? Samson put one foot down and then tried the other. He cringed, cried out, and then slumped back against his brother. I can't, he said, shaking his head. Samson took several deep breaths. Sweat poured off his face. Andre looked at Leslie. The rest of the boys had somehow disappeared. We've got to carry him, man, Leslie nodded. And the 2 boys hoisted the smaller boy between them and carried him home, down the same street, which now seemed even hotter. Number 1. Andre told Samson to tough it up. Is this stated in the text or is this implied by the text? So is it explicit? Can we look at the text and see it there? Or do we have to think about what is being said and assume that that is what they mean? So let's look now. Tough it up, tough it up. Oh, here it is in the first line. Tough it up, man. So if it's right there in the text, that means that it is explicit information. Number 2, Leslie and Andre picked Samson up. Is this explicit information or is it implicit information? All right, so let's look here. It says, we've got to carry him. Leslie nodded. And the two of them hoisted the smaller boy between them and carried him home. So we know that they carried him home, but they didn't use the word picked Samson up. Okay, they didn't use that term, but they used hoisted. And hoisted means to lift. Okay, so this is implicit then. Number 3, Samson was sad and depressed that his foot was hurt. Explicit or implicit? And I'm going to use implicit. Let me tell you why. Samson put one foot down and then tried the other. He cringed, cried out, then slumped his back against his brother. I can't. Samson was shaking his head. He took several deep breaths and sweat poured off his face. So that does not sound as if he was happy, joyful. So one could assume now that he was sad and depressed, but that is implied. We don't see that written that he was sad and depressed. Number 4, Samson could not walk on his foot. Is this explicit or implicit? And that is explicit. Here's the question, can you walk? And here's the answer, I can't. So that's explicitly stated that he can't. Number 5, Andre, Leslie, and Samson are all best friends. And we don't see any information to that. It's implied because these were the two, Andre and Leslie, had stayed when the rest of the boys had disappeared. And then they were the ones that hoisted the boy between them and carried him home. Right? And only your friends would really look out for you in a time of trouble. All right? So Leslie and Andre carried Samson home, and that was stated explicitly because they say here, and carried him home. All right, so that is stated. They didn't put him on a taxi or on a bus. They took him home. Number 7, Samson was sweating, and that is explicit. Let's find it in the text. It says here, sweat poured off his face. So we see that in the text, so that's explicit. Samson hurt his foot playing football. This is implied. It could have been some other game involving multiple boys, and the only evidence we have that it's a group game is that the other boys had somehow disappeared. Right? It says here the rest of the boys had disappeared, so it was a team game. So it wasn't, something that they were playing individually, but a team sport. And football is a team sport, so it could be football, but that was not stated directly, so that's implied. Now, last one. Andre was annoyed that Samson got hurt. Is this explicit or implicit? Did he say, I am annoyed that you got hurt? Let's look at the first line. He says here, tough it up, man. It's just a little bruise. We're going to get you home now. All right. And his voice was alternating between terror and toughness, right? So Andre is somewhat annoyed that Samson got hurt. So this would be implied and not explicitly stated. In this episode, we looked at implicit and explicit information. Let us remember that implicit information is not stated there in the text. You can't read it and see it in the text. Explicit information, you can look in the text and find the information. So implicit information is implied. You have to read between the lines and kind of think about it to get to the answer. And explicit information is right there in the text. Now, what you're going to do, you're going to use this activity now to go to your textbook and do a few activities on implicit and explicit information, and then pass this to your teachers for feedback. Alright, take care guys, and I'll see you in the next episode.